Greetings, good people, and a very warm welcome to you all. Now, my first ever horological memory was this watch, and my little duck wagging eyes watch from Ruler, but mainly this one, as my old man used to have one. It's a legendary Seiko 5 from the 1980s, the decade of diagonal stripes. This watch has a missing end link, a badly scratched obsolete mineral glass, a movement that is running incorrectly, and the case and bracelet have a lot of marks and scratches with loss of gold plating in places. So the first thing I want to tackle is this missing end link. Without the end link, I'll just have to stick the watch on a leather strap. The end link is not something that can be replaced with a generic item, as it has these vertical lines which flow all the way down the bracelet. Oh dear, it looks like it's still trying to dance to an 80s tune, recorded on a repaired mixtape joined with sellotape. I couldn't find any service marks on the watch, but looking at the movement, it's safe to assume that this 17 joule automatic has had some previous intervention.
Sweet!
Ah, those diagonal lines on that dial. I remember them clearly, bouncing out of my old man's watch when he hit the light at certain angles. But enough with the nostalgia. Some nostalgia is happy and fluffy, like discovering an old Argos catalogue. But other types of nostalgia can be painful, so I try and avoid it, especially if it's nostalgia related to a person you loved who is gone. So today, a breakaway from the normal movement disassembly first format. Let's sort out this bracelet first.
Let's just dismantle this whole thing. Feel like a spring bar. Oh, we've got a little dent on the side as well. Hey!
So this is a stainless steel bracelet that has been gold plated, and to do a good job I need to dismantle as much of it as possible.
Now this is something else. You can see it's covered. So we may need to just lift one side up, and that should expose the pin.
So I needed to remove this tricky folding clasp, as this part won't be replated.
So I've opened up both ends. I'll just try and hammer that out now. It's coming out, see? Bit of an unnecessary design.
The friction pin is in there pretty solid, so I don't know why it needed to be covered with folded metal, but I suppose it was an extra safety precaution. Bracelets and clasps have come a long way since the 80s, but our bracelet has that 80s flimsy charm about it, so I want to restore it as best as I can.
So you can see how flimsy and dull that is, but that will take a nice shine, and we'll mirror the heck out of this. And then let's just work on this little bit here. So let's see what this thing is doing. And it's giving us the appearance that this whole center part is dented as well, but I think if we just flatten out these two points here, flatten it out here where it seems to have risen, that should make it look appear normal again. I'll just give this a couple of taps and see what happens. You can see how all these are here. Just give it a few taps. It's getting there. Don't even know which one it is now. I think it's this one. Let's try a little bit of metal on metal. Can you see my face on that ball? Oh yeah, what a handsome face. Oh yeah. So it's always a good idea just to see what the thing is actually doing before going all crazy and dismantling the whole link. And it looked like the whole thing was bent, but just the edges gave it that appearance. Can't even tell which one is. That was all bent up. Can you? Well, we know it was that one. It's alright. Sweet!
So using the one surviving end link, I managed to find this one which was similar in size and had the same cutout. It is also a very flat square design to go with the straight lugs on our square case, but you can see the lines are not what we want. So I'm going to try and add some lines which resemble the original.
Now as for these lines, I've got it locked on at about 2 mil. I'll try and score that on here and then try and make some lines somehow. So there's my little score line.
It would have been a good idea to have this set up on a sliding table on my lathe, but the cutting discs I had were all too thick, so I decided just to score some lines on it using a graver just to give it some semblance of the original.
So now that I know what to do and how to do it, I'm going to polish out lines here and then I'll apply the 5 lines, see if I can do a good job with my graver. I think I went a little bit too crazy.
So my initial attempt wasn't very good, but it was the only one I had which was similar in size. So now I need a new plan.
What do you think about that? 3 more to go.
So I had to delve into some of my modern end-linked spare parts bin.
So I put a straight grain on this one, try and make it similar to this, but it doesn't look that good to be honest. So I'm going to start again, and that was the closest one I had because it was sort of straight, see the shape. But this one, as you can see, it's curved, but the cutout is the same. But you can see it's big. So I'm going to shave this one down and reshape it and then try that bit again.
So this modern end link has a bit more meat to it as it's thicker, so polishing those old lines out should leave me the same thickness of metal as the original. Not only does this have a curved end for a round case, but it also bows slightly, so I had to flatten it out first. And now I'm just shaving off the curved horns using a diamond disc. I'm sure many of us have been in this situation where you can't find the correct end link, so you reluctantly have to resort to using a leather strap. So hopefully this segment will help some of you in a similar situation.
Now it's too long, you can see, so I need to shave both edges down.
I have a little rest on my grinding wheel, so I'm just using that to remove an equal amount of metal from either end, making sure that the cutout stays central.
Now I need to get rid of all those lines again and see if I can get it right this time.
So now that I have shaped the piece, I can remove the old lines using some heavy cutting compound on a flat wheel before I try my dodgy line graving again. And I did need to have a couple of more goes at it.
So after several attempts, this is probably the one I like most. So I've also given you a little brush finish, and then you can just gold plate it now with the rest of the bracelet.
Now, although most of the gold plating is still intact, we may need to remove most of it, especially here as there is some heavy grazing on the clasp. So first I need to remove these heavy marks in order to have a nice even surface to plate on. I do this using some cutting compound and a felt wheel. And it may be an old cliche now, but it's a true one. If your prep work is good, then your final plating job will also look good. So take your time here and try to enjoy it instead of getting all flushed and sweaty. Sometimes you just have to stop fighting with certain marks and let them win. For example, here on the Seiko logo, there is a scratch. So to avoid defacing the logo, I have to let the scratch win. And here you can see that long horizontal scratch has gone beyond the gold plating. So that's one I can win if I take my time.
So you can see some scratches right on the logo, and I'm going to leave that alone and I'll just give that a little brush finish and that'll be ready to plate.
Polishing out big scratches is the cutting stage, and this will usually leave your piece quite shiny, but our clasp originally had a brush finish beneath the gold. So once I'm happy with my cutting stage, I then apply the brush finish to the clasp and the bracelet. The stainless steel folding clasp also looked like it had a dull brush finish, but this was due to years of wear and tear. It would have originally been shiny mirror polish. So once again, I'll cut out all the deep marks using a stitch mop, and then I'll do a second cut and a final buff to get it all gleaming.
So remember how dull and scratched up that was? It's not looking too bad. Just needs a wash and a final finish.
And I stress this all the time. Always make sure you wash between each stage so as not to cross-contaminate your mops. Otherwise you'll get fine bits of metal from your heavy cutting compound onto your finishing mops. Here I am just applying the final buff to the folding clasp, and if your initial stages are done well, then your final buff should only take a few passes. Now I'm not preparing the case yet, as I still have the crystal attached to it as a necessity, but while I'm in the polishing room, I'll do the stainless steel case back. And again, I'll do some initial prep work on the flat lap, and then I'll apply the original circular grain using my lathe. And as you can see, I haven't gone crazy on the case back, as it wasn't necessary, and we also have to look after all the engraving. And I would say that it's looking much better than before. And I've also done the 2 gold plated sections of the bracelet and given them their final brush finish before we gold plate.
So these bracelets, I've sort of done a semi-sympathetic prep on it because these lines aren't very thick, so I didn't want to risk losing them altogether. There are a few minor blemishes still on there. Same with this one. There's the clasp, it's very thin, so get that in the wash. There's the case back, and then we can wash it and give it all some gold.
So before I electroplate these pieces, I need to clean them thoroughly using cleaning solutions and then rinsing them with clean distilled water to remove all the cleaning solutions. Right, so I have some electro-cleaner, some stainless steel activator and some gold, and then I have some distilled water. You can see I've hung all my washing. So once I've cleaned the pieces in my ultrasonic baths, I'm using a final cleaning method using some electro-cleaner, and I've always found that a minute or so is enough. I then rinse off the electro-cleaning solution in a couple of baths of distilled water, and then I'll activate the stainless steel for a couple of minutes and then rinse quickly and into the gold plating solution. I use the stainless steel activator at around 7 volts. The voltage for the gold plating solutions will vary depending on if it's 18 karat or 24 karat and whether you're plating hot or cold, but when you buy your solutions, the supplier should tell you the best settings. Stainless steel can be a bit of a stubborn cow to plate, and some grades of stainless steel may not plate at all, so you may need to add an extra gold strike step to your process. But I'm happy to say that the stainless steel on this Seiko bracelet was very accommodating and accepted our gold without too much resistance.
So look at this one, see that bit wasn't getting any contact, so I'll put the wire through here this time. So now look at it, it's good.
Now, I did a shorter version of this segment as a separate tutorial, and for those of you who have already watched that tutorial will know how that ended. But you also know there wouldn't be this video if I remained in the fetal position. Now it only costs a few quid to buy generic round mineral glass, so why spend money on equipment and precious time polishing up old mineral, which isn't easy if you don't have the correct tools. And I've done several videos previously of me doing just that. But sometimes when it's an obsolete crystal and an odd shape, the only option is to polish up the old one or to make a new one from scratch. So I came across this machine made in India, which uses the same sort of principles as a gem polishing table. It's a bit rattly and needed a few modifications to make it usable, so I would recommend buying a cheap gem table for about 100 quid, as this one cost me around 300. If you want to know all the steps and what I'm doing and mixing, then check out the shorter tutorial. So I've kept the crystal on the case because the wheels on this machine do spin pretty fast, so I need a good grip on the workpiece. My crystal sticks out above the bezel of the case, so I can just hold it flat against the wheel without damaging the case. This is, I think, just a steel wheel, and I'm using some silicon carbide powder made into a paste. I'm sure you could even polish up sapphire using this method if you use some diamond paste. If I give that a try, I'll make sure to show you guys how that turns out. My previous attempts to polish up mineral on the channel were on an Omega pocket watch and a square Tudor watch, which took me ages using the techniques and tools I had at my disposal at the time. But with this machine, I managed to get rid of those nasty scratches very quickly without too much drama.
See where we are so far. And that looks much better. It's cloudy. Got a little bit more to go, I think. And my protective whatever is peeling off. I think it's done its job.
This crystal is not glued in and is held in using a gasket. So I tried to protect this gasket with some cure mask from Horotech. The gasket is also an odd shape, so not something I can replace as easily as a generic round shape.
We've got a few tiny specks, but I think that's good enough now to go on to the next stage. Let me just quickly wash that and show you guys what it looks like. Okay, so you can see. Sometimes my daughter laughs and she snorts and stops breathing. So that's still very cloudy now. And now I can move on to the final polish, which is the second one here. And I'll use some of this red stuff. Oh, I've got some cerium oxide. And this one has got a bit of felt on it. Let's get some of this on there.
So I've never used this red stuff before, and it's some sort of iron oxide. But after using it for the first time, I have to say I much prefer my cerium oxide for the final finish. But this is the powder that came with the machine, so I thought I'd give it a try.
Still looks very cloudy, so needs a bit more work, I think.
Iron oxide was the go-to polishing powder for glass up until the 1950s, but then cerium oxide was found to be far superior, and is still the preferred choice in industry today. But maybe in India, where this came from, they still prefer the red stuff. If I'm honest, I think I mixed the powder a bit too runny, and this piece of cloth attached to this wheel seemed very poor and wasn't holding in enough of the compound, so I may need to modify that part of the machine. But I have some more powder left, so I'll try a few more tweaks to see if I can get along with it, and I'll keep you guys updated.
So you can see now that I've polished it up, you can still see a few tiny marks, and I think there's still a small amount of glass left before it gets level to the case. You can see the case is still untouched because the glass is slightly higher, but if I want to, I think I can go a little bit further with the first cut again. Got some, obviously we're going to have some of these ones on the edges, just need to get it gleaming a bit more, or I might try the first cut again to try and get rid of all those marks. It's tiny pin marks. I decided to go again, and I think this time it's much better. I think I've got nearly every single one of those pin marks out. It's good. But I think I have reached my limit when it comes to the thickness of the glass. So there's one or two still in there. We'll have to live with that.
Just steaming up a bit. Just a bit of steam and dirt inside. Now I need to remove this glass without breaking it after all that. So I'll get it in the wash just to loosen everything up, and then I'll try and press it out.
So that's probably the closest I'm going to get, but you can see how much gap there is. So there's a danger I could crack it.
What's the worst that could happen, eh?
Well, here goes nothing. I broke it.
Are you gonna come in?
Yeah, I'm coming. I broke it.
So even split in half, this thing still doesn't want to come out, and required further force on the press, so I had no chance to begin with. So what are we going to do now?
What's the matter? What are you crying for? I should be crying. Oh well.
If there's anything that the 80s gave us, it was definitely diagonal stripes. I had diagonal stripes on my duvet cover, my pillow cover, the carpets. Bloody diagonal stripes everywhere in the 80s. Right, so enough with the shenanigans with the crystal. I can't buy another one, so keep watching to see how I resolve the issue. But for now, let's put it to one side and get this 7009A cleaned and lubricated. It's a 17 joule automatic with the day and date complication, so pretty straightforward. And there is a fair amount of interchangeable spare parts on the used market.
So that's interesting. Usually you'd have a English day disc and maybe a French one or an Arabic one, but this one's got English day and Roman numerals, day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on. Strange. And Sunday is a red square.
The 7009 is one of the most produced Japanese movements and started life in the 70s and was a bit of a workhorse for almost 2 decades. It has a 40-hour power reserve, a quick set day and a quick set date, and it's all done in a very efficient, no frills manner. So I just wanted to get those date parts off before I go on the other side, but we'll take some more of these loose bits off so they don't fall off, and I think we can go on the other side. You can see the lack of any finishing on this movement as they were relatively cheap movements, and my old man was a very frugal person, so I can only imagine how much he paid for his one all them years ago. It couldn't have been much, and that affordability would have been made possible due to a cheap mass-produced movement like this one. See the multiple slits in the crown wheel, and you should all know by now what that means. One goes one way and the ratchet wheel screw goes the other way. That's obviously to stop it from unscrewing itself. And I'm not showing you the unscrewing of every single screw on this disassembly process because I think the world and his wife have covered the 7009 on YouTube at some point. I've probably done one myself, so I'm just trying to hurry along the disassembly process. The 7009 was replaced by the 7S range, and you'll see a lot of familiar parts such as the magic lever or paw lever, which is such a basic and clever system, allowing the movement to wind both ways of the turn of the rotor without the need for reversing wheels and all the extra parts that you find on an automatic works of a Swiss watch. That's going to be attached to the cannon pinion, so I'll go back on the other side. And it should drop out as soon as I remove the cannon pinion. So now I'm back on the dial side and I'm just removing the springs for the calendar works, and all we have left after that is the keyless works. That didn't take too long, did it? If you're a tinkerer, then you will have come across this movement at some point in your journey. Fell out from there. But if you haven't come across one, then it's a good place to hone your skills if you're not ready to break the bank on a Swiss movement. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's easier on the nerves working on something where you know you have access to cheap replacement parts. And that's the end of that. Boom. So all I have left is the automatic works, and here is another look at that magic lever, which was invented by Seiko in the 1950s, and you'll be surprised to find them adopted by some top Swiss manufacturers. Let's see those magic fingers. So after inspecting all the parts, the movement does look pretty dry, apart from a little bit of gunk on the mainspring, and you'll notice that the mainspring is in the barrel anti-clockwise, whereas a Swiss mainspring is usually in there clockwise. So while I get all this ready for a clean, it's a good time to tell you all that I'll be doing another giveaway for a couple of brand new watches that have been sent to me for review. They have Swiss movements with diamonds, and one of them got run over by a car. So subscribe and put your notifications on so you don't miss that one. And as the previous giveaway, let me warn you in advance to be aware of all the scammers telling you in the comments that you've won. I will provide clear instructions in the video, which will be uploaded a week after this one. And don't forget to check out my new website for some wrist candy. So this was the gasket I was trying to protect, and it seems intact and in very reusable condition. As you can see, this case has got so many different lines and contours, so we're gonna have a really good time lapping this. A straight section here all the way around, then we've got an angle here, we've got this angle here, another one here, and then we've got the flat surface on the face. But before I go on the lapping machine, I want to see if I can pull out ding there. You can see the metal has been displaced, so I want to see if I can push that metal back in before I go on the lapping machine and start removing metal. So unlike the stainless steel bracelet and case back, the case is made of brass, which is soft like cheese, so I don't want to mess around too much trying to remove that ding otherwise it could go horribly wrong very quickly. So I just give it a couple of rubs to see what happens and decide very quickly that enough is enough.
It's brass and it's very soft, and I think that's as much as I could, because the rest of it's just right in that angle where the two surfaces meet. So let's try this line first. I don't think my table is working out. I'll just try and freehand it a little bit. I really do need a belt sander for this, which I don't have. So that will be the next piece of equipment I need, I think. But for now, see if I can freehand this. And I think I'm getting much better success doing it freehand. I'm just trying to get some of those marks out, because I'm going to straight grain that lug section anyway. You can see the difference. Even those areas where it was rounded off over the years, just from wear and tear, we managed to straighten out on this side. See around these lugs. So I'll just finish off this side, and then we can start working on these 1, 2, 3 lines. We've done the face and we've done the 2 lugs. Now we've got one angle here first, so I'll set the table up for that. Now we're going to work on this one. Now all I have is this flat one here. It's looking nasty. Still got a bit of the old nickel in those hard to get areas. This is what the case looks like so far after all that prep work. This is the second step. And that's looking pretty nice. Oh yeah, that looks nice as it is. I do want to brush these lugs though. I do want to give this a slightly thick grain. Just do that freehand, I think. You see? Sits perfectly at that angle. That's just one drag. I'll give you guys another angle. So check it out. And that's the unfinished one. And that's the one I've just done. And we've got these beautiful little shiny accents that extend all the way into this one. That looks beautiful. Let's do the other one.
So unlike the gold plating of the stainless steel bracelet, this brass case is slightly different. I do still use the electro-cleaning stage, but we don't need the stainless steel activation stage. The original case did have some nickel beneath the gold, but I've decided to leave that out here. So, I have made a crystal on a previous episode where I restored a TV-shaped Oris using basic tools I had lying around. But since I have the new machine, I thought I'd try using that this time to make a new crystal to finish off this project.
I want to cut it slightly smaller, this double-sided tape, so when I'm trimming and polishing, I don't want it catching on. I'm getting my discs all sticky. Stick that on there. I did try it with a marker, made a mess.
Now these generic round crystals only cost a couple of quid and I have lots of them in stock, so I'm going to use them as a blank. You can buy square blanks especially for this purpose. I stick my template onto the blank and score a line around it with this rusty diamond tip. It's a cheap tool and not something I would invest heavily in, as it's not something I do regularly. And just like cutting floor tiles, I break off the excess and get rid of as much of the unwanted material as possible. In the last crystal making episode, some of you suggested that I do this part underwater. Well, it's cold and I don't fancy going swimming, so this will have to do, and I know it looks scary, but it's not. And no, I don't have crocodile skin hands, even though it may look like that sometimes. My hands are actually really soft. So now that I have my basic shape, let's go and give our new machine some more work to do. And I use the steel wheel as before with the paste to remove the excess glass and smoothen out all those sharp ends. I make sure that I'm constantly charging up the wheel with the wet paste.
The difference on this side compared to this side with just a few seconds. Get in there. So very close, how close we are, and I'm using the straight edge of the old glass as a guide. So as soon as it pushes up against that old glass, I know I'm nearly there. So I think I've got that quite close. So I'll just do these corners, and then we've got some small chips on the edges, so I'll bevel the edges. Hopefully that should get rid of the chips. Can you see the bevel? I've done just there. And I'll do that all the way around. So when an idiot tries to make a crystal and he joins the two pieces the wrong way around like this, he ends up with a crystal that's kind of lopsided, which is what happened here. Look at that. Anyway, I had to bevel the heck out of it just to get rid of those small chips.
So what do you guys reckon? It's not perfect, but we've made the best of a bad situation. The crystal fits really well, but the finish isn't great. But I reckon with the experience I've gained from a couple of attempts, and if I take my time a little bit more, I could get this even better. But for now, let's just move on and finish this thing. So as I mentioned during the disassembly, the mainspring on this movement sits in the barrel anti-clockwise. So we need to wind it into the tool clockwise, and usually these toolkits like this one have an extra set of handles in blue for Japanese mainsprings. The hooks on the handles are in the opposite direction, so one can be wound in clockwise and the other winds in anti-clockwise. And here you can see the difference between a blue handle and a red handle. If you don't have the fancy winders or your old mainspring is damaged, then a new mainspring can be purchased for about a tenner. So now you can see the mainspring is in my tool clockwise, so when I flip it into the mainspring barrel, it will be anti-clockwise. And now I'll grease up the wall of the barrel with some braking grease before I stick in the mainspring. Clip up! Since we're reusing the mainspring, I've also added a bit of oil on top of the mainspring here, which should seep in and spread around the mainspring. This is just an alternative method to massaging the mainspring with oil while it's still uncoiled.
Hello, Mr. Noisy. Put my stuff back.
So before I start assembling the movement, I have a few more chores to do, such as this sub-assembly for the automatic bridge, and since my balance is still in from the washing phase, I may as well clean and oil up the cap jewel. And the shock settings on these movements are really easy to do without any special tools. They just require some repetitive incremental back and forth with an oiler or tweezers. So now I start the main assembly, and there are technical sheets out there for this movement with a list of oils and oiling points, and I'll add one to my website. I'll be using Swiss alternatives today. So I start off with the center wheel and secure that down with this bridge, and then I pop in the mainspring, and you can also do the click at this point. I then assemble my train and secure that down with the one bridge that serves as the train bridge, the barrel bridge and the automatic bridge. And this one bridge serves all approach is another example of this movement's design and manufacturing efficiency. Once the bridge is in, I just make sure my train is running free before I stick on the 3 screws. And since I haven't shown you much screwing around on this episode, I'll let you enjoy me screwing down these 3. Happy? So that's that side almost done. I'll just oil up the jewels and then we can get the ratchet wheel and crown wheel in. I'm using a combination of 90-10 for the jewels and D5 for the posts. This ratchet wheel screw always reminds me of Raiden for some reason. Now you can't actually manually wind this movement, so if you wanted to stick your pallet fork in at this point, then you can wind up the mainspring using this screw. But I'll leave the pallet fork and balance wheel for now and move on to the dial side. And on the dial side, I'll oil up the jewels and post using again a combination of 9010 and D5, and I'll also clean and oil the cap jewel for the balance. And we have two different shock settings for the top and bottom pivots of the balance wheel, but again, removing and installing this is done easily using the same method as I explained earlier. And you can slow down this segment here to see how I did it using just a repetitive slide and pull method. So as I just mentioned, you can't actually manually wind this movement, hence why there isn't a winding pinion and just this clutch. Having automatic winding and manual winding would have required several extra parts, thus adding to the cost and complication of the movement. Usually we use blue grease on these sections around the keyless and stem, but Seiko use the same lubrication here as they do on the posts. So since my Swiss alternative for the post is D5, I'm using that on the stem and the keyless too. Now if I stop talking in parts of the video, some of you fall asleep, so I'll give you some history on Seiko, and I'll probably butcher some of these pronunciations. But the word Seiko is derived from the word Seikosha, which was the first factory opened by the founder of Seiko, Kintaro Hattori, which is where the name of the movement manufacturer Hattori comes from. Hattori was only 21 years old when he first started selling and repairing pocket watches and clocks all the way back in 1881, and then a few years later he opened up his first factory known as the Seikosha factory. Seiko can mean exquisite, success or minute, and Sha means house. So all three meanings sort of fit the house. The factory started life as a clock manufacturer in 1892, but the 19th century does seem a little late to the party, and that's because Japan was still using a sort of a flexible, seasonal, lunisolar calendar. Had Japan not reformed its seasonal calendar system for a fixed solar calendar system, then Seiko may not exist today. So here we have this solitary plastic part which I didn't clean, so I'll just give it a little radical. And can you imagine a horological world without Seiko? Seiko shook up the monopoly in the watch industry and brought the Swiss watch industry to its knees back in the 70s and 80s. To some, it was known as the quartz crisis, but to others, it was a quartz revolution. Which description do you guys lean towards and why? Let me know in the comments. And we'll get this big ass date corrector spring on. Stick this screw in first, and then we'll engage it. You're probably thinking he tells us not to fall asleep and now he's fallen asleep himself. Don't worry, I'm still here. Ooh, look at that lovely date disc. It has a lovely satin look about it and has the appearance of quality that doesn't match the movement somehow. And that makes sense, as that's all you'd see of the movement through the date window on that luxurious looking dial. I think I got that finger in the wrong position. Should be on this side there. So I'm just finishing off the calendar works and all we have left is the pallet fork and the balance. But we do have a problem, so we're not over the line just yet. Ooh, some more jeopardy to keep you awake.
Yeah, that was my belly. Time to go and eat.
It's time to get the balance in. And I have the accountant who has joined me. Say hello.
Hello.
Now, I don't know if the balance got nervous and freaked out due to the presence of the accountant, or if it was damaged from the beginning, but the hairspring seems to have a slight wobble. The curve doesn't follow the regulator pins, as you can see here. When I move the regulator, it's pulling the hairspring to compact more on one side, so I need to correct that end curve. I fiddle around with it for a bit and make it worse before making it better. I give up. So that's it really. We've done the case, we've made an end link and restored the bracelet, we've polished the crystal and broke it and made a new one, and we've got this movement dancing coherently to an MP3. So let's put it all together and see how it looks. And while I finish up, I'd like to thank you all for spending some time with me today. There was a lot to cram in this episode, but I hope you learned something along the way. I think I like this one actually. Yeah, I'm gonna keep you on that one. Now if you guys enjoyed this video and you would like to see more content like this, then it would be really cool to have your support as a subscriber to the channel. So there you have it folks, a simple timepiece for a simple man that now looks simply gorgeous. The first watch that I ever saw as a child on a simple man's wrist. And who would have thought that almost 40 years later I'd be restoring one on TV. It's strange how life works sometimes. Without any certainty or a script, it has its own plan for you. And whatever your lot, certainly it will find its way to you. So fret not. They say there are no certainties in life except for death and taxes. But one thing I can say for certain is that there is no one on this planet who genuinely wants you to do better than him except for your father. So cherish him if you still have one. Take care folks, and take care of each other. Peace, love and blessings to you all. And if the Almighty wills, I'll see you on the next one. Ta-ra a bit.